I just wanted to give you a quick overview of what we've been up to at Accenture with the Research Life Sciences Cloud. Some of you may have heard about this project, so I'll give you a little bit of a background, and then I'll make the connection over to how we worked together with ChemAxon on making this happen, and how going forward we'll be continuing the work on creating an ecosystem of vendors that we're working with. ChemAxon hopefully being part of that ecosystem, but ultimately a system that is open to a whole range of independent software vendors. I'll start with a summary. It starts here by saying the pharma industry is struggling. Well, we all know that, right? If you're looking at drug development, it takes many years to develop a drug, bring it from initial discovery all the way to the to approval stage, with an extremely high attrition rate and therefore also an extremely high cost. Right at this point, the latest estimates are somewhere in the ballpark of $3 billion to bring a drug to market on average, and clearly that's not a sustainable path. And there's multiple approaches to improving this situation. We believe that if you can speed up discovery a little bit, that helps a little bit, but ultimately the real key is to help improve that attrition rate. If you make an even small incremental improvement to the attrition rate, ultimately that will make a huge impact on the overall development process. And that's where we're coming in. That's where we're teaming up with Merck and AWS on developing this Research Life Sciences Cloud that helps scientists work in this new in a more modern environment, where today a lot of the research IT solutions are done on legacy systems sitting on premise in isolated silos. Data is not being integrated. Data is not accessible. It's not discoverable. Going forward, we believe that this cloud environment can help with a number of different things. There's the possibility to enable collaboration in ways that it hasn't been enabled before. Moving to a cloud environment makes it a lot easier to bring in CROs, to bring in biotechs, bring in external partners to collaborate, just like you would collaborate on an internal in-house system. Also, the ability, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, to create an ecosystem, create a platform that brings together pharma companies and software vendors, content providers, service providers, brings all these together in a single marketplace, opens the door for quite a bit of innovation in this space. Last but not least, the whole platform is being set up and designed to be a pre-competitive coalition approach. So where we really bring together pharma companies, and pharma companies collectively decide the future developments of the platform. We've done this very successfully in other areas, most notably the Accenture Life Sciences Cloud in the clinical development space, where we've proven this model out, and this is a model that Merck specifically looked to Accenture to say, can we do this? Can we establish this in the research space as well? So that's something that we launched last year in September. So we've been at it for about 6 months. We had a beta release at the end of the year. We are actually just about this week in the process of releasing the first production version to Merck of the Research Life Sciences Cloud. It's a first step in a multi-year journey. Even with Merck, we're talking about this to be a 3 to 5 year project. So this is going to be a journey, and we're on it together. And ultimately, you see some of the highlights here. I already talked about the pre-competitive platform. One of the keys here is on the second bullet, is the ability to really bring in best-in-class capabilities at any given point in the research pipeline. Right? As a pharma company, your notion about what is best-in-class might change over time. As of today, oftentimes it's very difficult to bring in a new vendor if your needs change. But even more difficult, it's to change vendors mid-course. Right? You have the typical process of bringing in a vendor requires selection, and then you spend about a year of integrating that system, a lot of hardwiring connections to the other existing internal systems, so that by the time that's all said and done, if your needs changed, it's really difficult to change the software provider because you've already done all that work and you have to redo all that work again. So going forward, by building out this platform, one of the key benefits is really the component assembly, as you have it up there in the upper left. The other thing I talked about is the innovation. Right now, if you're a startup company, if you have some innovative tools, it can be very difficult to get your first customer within a pharma company. Right? Many small startups have tried and failed and died during that process of negotiating that first contract, that first license agreement, and the professional services agreement with pharma companies, making it easier to onboard vendors into an environment is a key goal here. And in fact, when we talk to Merck, one of their objectives by which they will be measuring the success of the platform a few years down the road is really on whether they can essentially just click and onboard a new vendor without having to go through a whole bunch of paperwork and procurement processes. Vendors have been pre-vetted in a kind of a marketplace environment. Their security has been assessed ahead of time. And so it's almost as simple as swiping a credit card and trying out new software and embedding it into your processes if you like it. The way we're doing this is by defining industry standard APIs for scientific research capability areas. And I'll talk a little bit about that, especially in the case of entity registration, how we work together with ChemAxon to define those APIs and figure out what those APIs are going to look like. Ultimately, the goal really is to establish a marketplace that brings together pharma companies, biotechs, academic institutions on the one hand side, and on the other hand, independent software vendors in the research space, but also in more advanced and upstart areas like AI and machine learning. Software providers, content providers. So the idea here is also to bring in public and proprietary content onto the platform, make that available to the tenants, and then also service providers. So you can imagine a scenario where you're in a pharma company, you want to request an assay, and if that assay capability is not available in house, you can through the platform you can just find a vendor that can provide those services for you. Again, pre-vetted. Procurement, having pre-approved by procurement. That's ultimately the goal of the platform. Now, the way we're building this platform is not by trying to replace existing vendors, and I think that's a really important point, because many times when people hear about this for the first time, they are a little concerned that Accenture is coming in and competing with them. That's really not the goal here. What we're doing in the platform is working with AWS, our partner, working on their cloud infrastructure. And then Accenture is really responsible for those gray boxes here, what is essentially a scientifically aware data lake. So we have data capture, data ingestion, data standardization, correlation of data, linking into a scientific data model. And then we also have services as part of the platform that support things like collaboration, but also deal with the boring back-end things like security and access controls and exchange of messages and all of the stuff that ultimately isn't necessarily the core competency of the vendors that sit in those purple boxes there. So the idea here is to work with vendors in this space. You see there ELN, entity registration, compound management, sample management, request management, all these different capability areas. We're not trying to develop those solutions ourselves. What we're trying to do is we're trying to define APIs that allow us to integrate with vendors in that space and allow them to access, allow the scientists to access the software through those APIs and vice versa, give the software vendors an avenue, a road towards new customers, towards new business on the pharma side. So that's ultimately the way we're envisioning this. Where we are today, we've done quite a bit of work on the gray boxes. So we've stood that up. We've done some work on. We've actually just released the APIs for entity registration talk a little bit about that. Obviously, we have data APIs for data access, data ingestion in place, and we're now in the process of extending this to assay data management, and assay protocol management. Ultimately, the platform, what I've just described up to this point is really, that's all stuff that you can do already today. You might not be able to do it quite the same way, but where it gets interesting is in the new things that a platform like this enables. Right? So for the first time, you have, through that data lake, you now have an environment that has all your research data and operational data in a single place, and you can start doing some AI and machine learning, applying those to those technologies to this data. That's been, up to this point, it's been very difficult to get to that model-ready data set process of one-off data aggregations and bringing different data together, extracting them, making them available to machine learning tools, and then repeating that process over and over when your questions change. Going forward, it's going to be a lot easier with all that data in a single place. Now, if it was just a data lake, you would say, well, I already have that in place. I can already do that. But another piece of the puzzle here is the integration between those different research capabilities. The integration with a workflow system that allows you to tie these different research capabilities together in ways that are very difficult to do right now, right? Because of that difficulty in hardwiring everything. With the platform, you can do things like when you register an assay, you automatically send off a request to a CRO to synthesize the compound. Once that compound comes back into on-premise, once it's somewhere in your inventory, you can then automatically request an assay to be run on that compound. And when the data and all of that goes seamless back and forth between internal scientists and external scientists, and you don't really have to worry about that. You never have to copy-paste data from one system to the other. So that's really the collaboration aspects here. And then last but not least, I think what we can probably learn is from other areas, and most notably is really things like your phone, is the idea of more of an amplification of your research tools. Breaking scientific applications down into maybe smaller pieces that are a little bit better targeted at what they do, but at the same time providing an environment and an ecosystem that allows the seamless transfer of data between those systems. I'm old enough to remember when I had to take my digital camera and take a picture with it, and then take the memory stick out and put it into my laptop and copy the pictures onto the desktop, and then from there upload them to Google, to some other system, or post them to Facebook. These days you can do all of that with a single click from within your phone. And the vision here is to bring research into that 21st century mode of working as well. Like I said before, we'll do this not by doing everything ourselves. Well, the vision here is to team up with partners. We have, at this point, worked or talked to well over 100 software companies, content providers and services organizations. With about 15 of them, we've made it to the collaboration agreement stage, so where we have a co-marketing agreement in place. ChemAxon is definitely one of these 15 companies. In fact, ChemAxon was probably one of the first companies, so we got to that stage with. And then, of course, we have our coalition members and the core technology providers like Amazon and Merck that are all part of this ecosystem. But overall, the vision here is to create an ecosystem around APIs. Just to give you an idea how this high level, how this works with within the platform, and obviously this is more of an architecture slide than an architecture slide, but at the core of the platform you have, we're using MuleSoft for API hosting and API call orchestration. Then we have separate API area that we've defined with data APIs, registration APIs, assay data capture, and so on and so on. So over time, this is going to grow the list of APIs. And then for each capability, there's a matching set of platform APIs that expose that capability to the end user, to software developers. And then there's provider APIs, the APIs that are required for services to be available through the platform. And so in the case of entity registration, I was intrigued when I saw Roland's talk earlier, because I think it kind of validated the ideas that we have here as well, which is From an end user's perspective, all you really care about is entity registration. You don't really care whether it ends up being stored in ChemAxon's small molecule registration system, in ChemAxon's large molecule registration system, or in somebody else's database. At the end of the day, all you really care is about entity registration from a scientist's perspective. And that's something that we've been able to build and prove out and demonstrate last year at AWS reInvent. The whole process where we register entities, go through the stack, ultimately gets routed to the appropriate vendors. And the other piece there is you can then search across all your different entity registration systems from within a single user interface. You don't have to worry about where things are stored. You talked earlier about your scientist that couldn't find his or her peptide. You don't really have to worry about that because the platform search will search all the available registration systems. So just a quick shout out here. So talked about the platform APIs and the matching set of provider APIs. All of these APIs are RESTful. We try to keep them relatively simple. So you see the resources and the operations over there on the right. Done a lot of the work here with ChemAxon. And so what we've done is we actually started working with ChemAxon, defining the first iteration of the APIs. Then we went back to our sponsors at Merck. We discussed the APIs with them. We did another iteration of that. And at that point, we took the APIs up to the broader vendor community and made them available through the community and had more refinements on the APIs. That's a process that probably, I want to say that happened in the second half of last year and resulted in us in January publishing version 1 of the entity registration APIs. And that's similar process that we're going to follow with other capability API areas going forward. We don't want this to be a case where Accenture defines the APIs and everybody else has to follow. The goal really is to work with the community, with the vendor community, with the user community, to define the APIs here and create them in a community fashion. You see our roadmap here. So we're working right now on asset data capture. Later this year, we'll start work on APIs on genomics and image data, sample and inventory. And then those will move into the production release early next year. And then we'll start things around IP capture, document management, and other capabilities that are related. So things are changing. The roadmap is we're working in an agile fashion here. So the roadmap changes a little bit with Merck's changing needs, but also with the industry changing needs. So we're trying to, in our roadmap, balance the needs of our existing clients, the needs of the industry at large, and then also the needs of the vendor community. And we've managed to come up with a roadmap that hopefully balances the needs between all of these. Specifically from an ecosystem perspective, what we're doing this year and next year is to put the infrastructure in place. In addition to us talking to a lot of the vendors, we're really starting to set up architecture review boards, or setting up regular meetings and coalition meetings, both in person and calls. Manage the APIs, both publishing existing APIs, managing the roadmap of the APIs. Also starting the process of talking about governance of APIs, how we're actually going to make changes to APIs, and how are we going to certify vendors that they're compatible or compliant with the APIs. I mean, the idea here is Hal Stern from Merck, based on his experience that he's had at Sun with Java, I think we're really trying to model a little bit about that, the idea of creating a validation suite that is open, everybody can have access to it, and you can basically check the compatibility of your solutions with that suite. Ultimately, my goal is to get to a point where, as a vendor, you don't ever have to talk to Accenture to get your software onto the platform. Right? I want Accenture to get as much out of the way as possible. We don't want to be a gatekeeper as such. We just want to provide the platform, make it available, and ultimately you can. It should be open to everybody to just develop the software. The APIs are all open; they're all free. There's no royalties or licenses that need to be paid for. Where, of course, you do eventually have to deal with Accenture is if you want to have a development sandbox. So as a developer, if you want to have your own slice on the platform, if you want to be a tenant on the platform, then of course we can make that happen as well. And then we can talk about various programs on how to do a closer business relationship. That's our strategy, and I'm open to questions. Otherwise, if you don't want to ask questions now, come and grab me during lunch. I'm happy to answer.